Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Calden Datsimpa. I am your host, the host of Metropolis, the show that you are listening to, perhaps on a walk. Maybe you're driving, working out. Maybe you should actually be at the office, but instead you're watching the show. In any case, thanks for listening. Today, we have a great episode. We're here talking about the housing crisis. Now, people always talk about the housing crisis. But I think sometimes we get lost in kind of definitions, what means what, and there's a lot of kind of different assumptions floating around about the housing crisis. There are some real things like in Montreal, as of July this year, vacancy rates are at 1%. Usually they say healthy vacancy rates should be around 2 to 3, so we are well below that. Another stat for you about the state of the housing crisis is that asking rents are up 71% since 2019. So the rents that landlords are asking for their units, the price have gone up 71%. Now, we are in the umpteenth year of the housing crisis, and I thought, who better to talk about this housing crisis than Gavin Armitage Ackerman, urban planning researcher and housing policy analyst. He's been on the show before. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be back. What,
Oh,
third time or
Third
something?
time, third time. Every time talk about housing.
Yeah,
This time,
that's what I do.
is it getting any better out there, Gavin?
No, the rent's too damn high. I feel like that guy was saying that in like 2006 on
Yes.
YouTube or something.
Yeah,
and,
the guy with the boot on his head.
is that no? It was a different guy. The boot. You're thinking of Vermin Supreme.
I'm pretty sure it was Vermin Supreme who said the rent's too damn high.
No, it was that other guy. Remember he had the big lamb chops on the side of his face.
All right, well, we gotta
Anyways.
do the rent's too damn high.
Now we're
We
Googling
just gotta Google this. Jimmy,
Jimmy,
Oh,
the rent
yeah.
is too damn
Yeah,
high.
you're right.
McMillan. And was it? That's definitely not 2019. But yeah, that was
yeah.
that was like late 2000s, early 2010s. The point really is just, there's a rent too damn high party.
2005. Yeah, it's
Oh.
run by Jimmy McMillan.
Sign me up
this
for
is
that.
I would vote for this party.
I would, yeah, that sounds like my kind of platform.
Yeah.
Anyways, point of that was just to say, I feel like that was like, 20 years ago?
Yes,
And
yeah, exactly.
the rent remains high. The
Yeah.
rent has not declined, really.
Yeah,
So it's pretty bad.
I mean, I guess, but before we get into, so the whole, I have you on this episode because we're going to talk about, as I mentioned before, some assumptions people have about the housing crisis, right? Today we're here to bust the myths about the housing crisis here in Montreal. But before I get into that, I feel like it's important to note that this housing crisis is sort of like multifaceted, right? It's like at one end, it's this crisis of affordability. On the other end, which sort of in turn causes this crisis of like homelessness as well, right? Like homelessness is on the rise again. There's like lots of tent cities being set up in Montreal, like never before. You know, in all the time I've lived in this city, I've never seen them quite to that extent. So I'm kind of curious how you view the housing crisis, or how you define the housing crisis.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. As you said, it's like multifaceted, right? There's all sorts of different components, and there's all sorts of consequences to housing unaffordability. In the same way, there's like different markets, right? So like you can kind of think about it in like those two different ways. Like oftentimes we hear so much about the housing crisis and the housing market, and I think we're going to kind of get into that a little bit as we go through some of these myths that you've prepared that we're going to discuss. But to say that there's a sort of blanket crisis, I guess is maybe true in the abstract, but really it's like we have as you've said, we have a crisis of increasing homelessness. We have crises in racism and discrimination in housing as housing becomes harder and harder to access, and like landlords and developers and other people are kind of clamping down and trying to make as much money as possible. They're discriminating, and like there's all sorts of ways that this kind of trickles down a little bit. And I also think it's really interesting just to consider the fact that we're talking about a housing crisis, housing crises. I think it's also important to acknowledge that a crisis, the word crisis, it kind of implies this like very temporary kind of aspect to it. Like, oh, this is like this very temporary emergency. It's a hurdle.
Yeah.
It's a hill that we gotta get up, and then eventually we'll get over the hill. But as you said, we're in the umpteenth year. We've been in a housing crisis for like 30 years at this point, which continues to get worse. And I think it's probably time to start kind of investigating how we understand the housing crisis, some of the foundational arguments, and some of the rhetoric people use to kind of help us understand, like, okay, maybe this is not this temporary thing where we just need to build more housing. Maybe there are some foundational problems to how we approach housing, and until we do that, we're going to be stuck in this permanent crisis, which really just does not seem to improve very much, right?
I would like it not to be permanent.
That would be ideal. I mean, maybe I'm turning into a bit of a doomer here, but I'm starting to get worried. I'm not going to lie that this may be becoming sort of this permanent state of emergency.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
The alarm bells are ringing for you.
Yeah, and that it's just, I think it's good to discuss some of these myths because, like, you can't properly assess how things are going unless you're equipped with like the right tools and analysis, and you can't solve a problem until you admit there's a problem. And as we're going to talk about a little bit, they're not really getting to the core of the problem here with housing. They're sort of
missing the diagnosis.
Exactly. Yeah. They're like maybe addressing some symptoms, but they're skipping the foundational.
So you're the doctor here.
I'm Dr. Gavin.
Dr. Gavin.
Yeah. And you should take all my medical advice.
Yeah.
Solicited or not.
Let's get right into this. So the first myth I have prepared that I kind of want you to speak on is there's this idea that homeowners benefit from the housing crisis. I think I saw a piece in the CBC last year where someone was talking about how it was sort of like they're trying to portray it as this thing of like, because housing prices continue to go up, right? And it becomes sort of like, like one of the people talk a lot about how, there's such a bigger hurdle now for like first time home buyers, they can't enter the market. And that it was sort of set up as like everyone who does own property or a home gets to benefit from the crisis, right? Because it's that sort of thing where like, people always talk about it being a bubble and it's going to burst, but it just continues to balloon, right? So the people who actually who can afford to have these places, who either bought them long before the crisis or who were able to get in early enough that the cost eventually wasn't so high, now they get to benefit from like an incredible ballooning of like value for that on their part, right? You have like, you hear about these like I think about like some people I know in like cottage country, they bought like these like little tiny like wood shacks right near a ski hill for like, not even a popular ski hill, for like 30 grand in the 70s and the 80s. And now it's like almost like 200 grand that they could sell it for, It's like, and that's just like, this is like, I think, talk about selling something at 200 grand. Of course, I think it's like, it's a huge increase. But then like, I think when you compare it to other places, like there's like places like in like, even like kind of more like poor areas of Montreal that like, used to kind of no one would really touch it, right? Like these neighborhoods were like not yet gentrified.
Yeah.
And now things have changed so much. There's such a demand, I guess, for housing. Prices have gone up so much that people are just letting go of these like ramshackle houses for like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, in some cases millions.
In some cases millions. Yeah. I think you see this across Canada, but I think there's something specific to Montreal where you see this kind of happening in certain kind of neighborhoods, and just kind of like you just see the ceiling of price kind of go up and up and up, and it just changes the character of these neighborhoods completely. So, to get back into the myth here, Gavin, do homeowners benefit from the crisis?
Yeah, this is an interesting idea. There's a few different ways to kind of approach this question. I guess to sort of reiterate maybe a bit of what you've said, the main sort of way people mention this, it's usually in the way of saying, homeowners benefit from high prices because they're building more equity and, they want to just amass wealth, for their retirement or because, maybe they own multiple homes and they're investors and they want to, whatever. But the point is that they're going to build equity, and they want higher and higher home prices And in order to do that, they're going to get in the way of progressive or positive urban change, right? There's a couple ways that people usually point to. The first one is one that I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with, which is NIMBYism, not in my backyard, which is sort of the classic case that is often pointed to in urban planning as, it's essentially homeowners coming together to get in the way of whether it's like new affordable housing, infrastructure, a
Something's
daycare,
being proposed, and these people are saying, no, not in my backyard.
not in my backyard. Oftentimes they'll say, we do want this, just not in my backyard. That's kind of where the phrase comes from. So they'll say, yeah, we have a housing crisis. We need more housing, but we don't need it in my backyard, right? And so I've seen some, there's so many like ridiculous, crazy stories of homeowners coming together to protect their property values, against like, there was one in Toronto, I remember, which is always stuck in my mind, where like homeowners came together to defend a parking lot from being turned into like affordable housing for youth.
So brave.
And they're like, this is like really important for our community. It's like a longtime community spot. Like,
I come here, and sometimes I park my car here. You can't take that away from me.
yeah, I mean, it's like as if the parking lot is like serving any sort of significant purpose for your community, besides like, I guess it has like an extra 20 parking spots, but there's stuff like that. But the point really here is just that these NIMBYs, they want to protect their home values, and so they'll get involved at the local level to prevent stuff from happening. And this is a very real phenomenon. It's a huge problem. I saw a really great video like last week actually from, I think it was About Here on YouTube. It's a great, urbanism channel, but talking about like the problems with all of these with like local like community consultations and public hearings being hijacked by like basically angry homeowners
who I guess mobilize very quickly and readily for these small issues.
Yeah. And so the point of all this is that, there are cases where there are these homeowners doing that and getting in the way of things to protect their home values. And there's also the problem of on a more macro level, where people will say, well, I kind of call it the hot potato problem of, they'll say, well, there's all these homeowners with all this equity and they want to protect, the value of their home. And there's such a big voting pool. So why would the government ever do anything to lower the price of housing when you have so many people who, are going to punish the government by not voting for them if they do something, right? That's one of the arguments. And that's also true in a sense. But here's the thing, right? The whole point here, why I mention these, is that there's a thing that both of these sort of arguments do, which is that there's a kernel of truth. I mean, more than a kernel of truth. They are true in a large sense, but they also do this thing where it leads to this argument of lumping all of these homeowners together into one uniform, homogenous group of people. And it's just not true. The matter of fact is actually there's a lot of reasons that homeowners don't benefit from the housing crisis in a way that's actually not that different from renters. Obviously renters have a lot of vulnerabilities that a homeowner may not have, for sure. There's different aspects to it. But at the end of the day, when you start to dig into the actual statistics about homeowners, you start to realize what a frustrating and precarious place so many of these homeowners are actually in. For example, when we think about the NIMBY homeowner getting in the way of stopping or getting in the way of whatever, affordable housing, this or that, we also got to acknowledge that like it's a real minority of people that actually even live in like a debt-free, paid-off home. Right. Most like there's like a small minority of those people that are getting in the way of everything to protect their nest egg, basically. Most people are still in the market. They've got a mortgage on their home, and they are still going to be struggling to, deal with all the fluctuations in like interest rates and the market and all these things. I don't want to go too in depth here and get lost in the sauce a little bit, but a lot of people who maybe aren't as familiar with like how mortgages work don't realize that there's a lot of these homeowners that have what's called a variable rate mortgage. This is like a huge proportion of homeowners right now. When I say that like homeowners don't really benefit from the crisis, like this is kind of what I'm talking about. You have a huge amount of people who are essentially over leveraged. What they did is they got into the housing market. They bought their home when interest rates were very, very low, so they could borrow very cheaply. The interest rates were around like 1% basically. So you were paying very, very low amounts of interest on your mortgage. And this was the case for like many years. We had record low interest rates, which means all these people were borrowing, people that want to get into the market, they're borrowing, they're getting in, and they're buying their house. And then suddenly the rug kind of got pulled out from all these, under all these people, and interest rates went up to like 5+%.
Right.
And suddenly you have people whose mortgage payments, because they're on these variable rate mortgages, which are mortgages where your interest rates change according to, the prevailing interest rates, rather than being fixed or anything, which is how it used to really be. You have all these people that are now stuck in this situation where they were paying, I don't know, let's say $2,000 a month in a mortgage payment, and now interest rates have gone up and they're paying like $9,000 a month, right? It's getting to the point where about 1 in 5 people with a variable rate mortgage, which is a sizable amount of people, their payments are now going into the negative, where the interest rates have gone up so much that they're now basically paying their mortgage bill every single month, and it's not even paying off their debt. Their
Right,
debt's
they're
actually continuing to grow.
They're stuck in the they're just stuck in the margin of the interest then.
Basically, yeah. And again, it's a little complicated. There's different types of variable rate mortgages, and so I'm not going to go into all the strict details of all that. But the point really here is just to drive home that there's a minority of homeowners that are actually these people that have a debt-free, paid-off home.
Right. Yeah.
When in reality, most people they're still paying their mortgages, and a lot of those people are still subject to the things going on in the market. If your home value is blasting through the roof and interest rates are going up and all these things are happening, it can really negatively affect your ability to make your monthly payments and put food on the table. And
Right. Of course. Yeah.
it's a really difficult situation for a lot of people. Homeowners really don't benefit from a home being $1.3 million. They get in at a very, very low interest rate, and they're like, oh, I can afford this because the interest is so low every month. And then boom, interest rate goes up, and suddenly they're paying. I saw a guy who got he got a bill from his bank. This is super crazy, where he was in a type of mortgage where what ended up happening is that the interest rates went up, and then the type of mortgage that he was in was it basically was a fixed payment mortgage. I'm not going to get into the details, but
Sure.
It's kind of confusing. But he was in a fixed rate. So basically it was like you pay the same rate every month no matter what, which is good. But then on the flip side, you also, your amortization period, the period over which you pay,
Oh, it's longer.
well, it changes basically
Okay,
depending on how long it would take. 72 years. It was going to take him 72 years to pay off his house at this rate every month. And so you got to go in and renegotiate and whatever. So
That's nuts.
yeah,
Becoming an indentured slave to the bank.
it basically is what's happening. And I think it's also interesting because a lot of this was not so commonplace until bigger banks like CIBC came in and pushed to like loosen a lot of restrictions and encourage lending to these people at really favorable rates and encouraging them to take on variable rate mortgages instead of a more traditional one, which would be a fixed rate. You go in, you get your mortgage, and you negotiate the rate with the bank for a 5-year period, and then you come back in 5 years and you renegotiate.
Right.
That's kind of how it used to be. And you now have the banks have really encouraged these people to basically take on way too much debt so that they're just paying obscene amounts of money to the bank either every month or just the same amount for an extreme amount of
70
time.
years.
Yeah, which in
Yeah,
that
yeah,
case
yeah.
that would have been absurd, and like I think they would have had to just renegotiate
No,
that.
yeah, of
But
course, of course.
um, but
I,
so you know,
I think that's just a lot because it's like we imagine these kind of scenarios as like I guess like oh you own a house, wow, that's so nice for you, but it's like it's not like you're out in the it's not like you're out in the clear, you know. You have like it's essentially like you change from like giving your rent to a landlord now to just giving your rent to the bank, who's still gonna try to like rip every cent off of you, you know.
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
especially with the thing of like, especially as like with the people who have these kind of variable rate mortgages, you know, if it goes so high and it starts becoming untenable, then you have to kind of let go of this thing, which is like the property you wanted to buy.
Yeah,
And then the only people I feel like in this kind of environment who could like continue buying that are people who already have the capital for that, right? So
yeah.
like large like investment firms, holding companies, like the really big corporate landlords, you know, they'll kind of come take up more space. It's something I see that the actual rate of home ownership is kind of decreasing, and it's the in the sort of the people who are buying homes as investments that is sort of going up.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, in terms of investors buying houses in Canada, there's cities where you know I don't remember the exact numbers, but in a lot of years, if you go to like Vancouver, Toronto, and then even like a lot of really small towns, the the percentage of homes that are being purchased by investors rather than people that are owner occupied dwellings, right? You buy a house and you go live in it. These are just places that are being bought as investments. In a lot of major cities, it's like up to half of what's being bought oftentimes is it's just being purchased by an investor
Right,
with no intention of living in it.
right, of course.
I've seen some places in Canada, particularly in smaller mid-sized cities, where literally nearly 100% of all the homes being purchased are being purchased by investors.
Yes, I think the famous one is London, Ontario.
There's a ton in London, and in the Maritimes, there's a lot of smaller towns where, yeah, exactly, 86%.
Yeah, here. So we're looking at this article in the CBC. It says more than 86% of London's apartment condos are owned by investors. That's by Stats Canada. In Montreal, it looks, I think it's something like 30%. 30% of rental units in Montreal owned by 600 companies. 0.5% of all landlords in Montreal. So not quite as steep as the London model, but here we have just, I guess, two different points on the graph, which kind of show this kind of this slow accumulation, right, of
Yeah.
property by these kinds of companies.
Oh, 100%. And right now, single family homes specifically are now being purchased largely by corporations and like large investment firms, REITs, these types of people. Whereas in the past, well, still ongoing, it was mostly condos, right? It was one bedroom condos that were basically just being built so that investors could invest and it would kind of prop the market up and all these things. And now that single family homes are even becoming so difficult to obtain, corporations are just buying them. And in the US, you have huge companies going in, buying tens of thousands of houses, and then oftentimes subdividing them. They're just
Right.
buying a single family home that a family can't afford anymore, subdividing it and renting out to 3, 4 different families sometimes. It's yeah, it's pretty chicken
Grim.
situation. Yeah, but I think overall, I think it just sort of highlights the fact that that sort of discourse or the idea that homeowners are the the cause of the housing crisis and they're the ones that are getting in the way of affordability because they want to protect home values. I mean, there's definitely a percentage of people that are doing that 100%. They're very vocal and they're very determined. Whereas most people, I mean, the majority of homeowners do not have a paid off house.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They're still trying to make their payments and they don't really benefit from this. It really just kind of paints this divide between renters and homeowners. And for sure, there's divides and differences, but I think it's actually more helpful to highlight the things that renters and many of these homeowners have in common. These homeowners that have, honestly, in a lot of cases, I think have been kind of conned
Sure.
or put into a situation that's like a little untenable that they probably would not have gotten into had the government not really pushed all these people or the banks hadn't pushed all these people as well to get into the market,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and now they're like just totally they're over leveraged, right?
Lambs to the slaughter.
Yeah, pretty much. It's so
No, thank you for that. I guess that's it's really important. I guess to see the kind of ways that like a homeowner, it's not quite the same as a renter, but then mostly they were under this same sort of like pressure by like these bigger entities like the governments, banks, and like other kind of like housing corporations, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because when you think of these people with a variable rate mortgage, like as a renter, at least we have rent control, even though it needs to be improved. Like, my rental payment isn't randomly going up to $10,000 a month for
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
apartment. Whereas like there are people who own homes where that has happened, and it's not like they're rich.
Right. Yeah. Of
They're
course. Of course.
a regular middle or working class, middle class working class family that are now just kind of have their back against the wall.
Of course. Yeah.
And like I said, you now have like 1/5 of these people are like they're not even able to pay off their house.
Yeah. 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 It's just
Right.
going all towards interest.
Yeah, the bank is just absolutely ripping these
Yeah.
people off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So,
The big landlord. Let's move on to our second myth. So we just spoke briefly about the people buying up houses. We talk about corporations. We're talking about banks. How about foreigners?
ooh.
Oh, we hear a lot about foreign buyers and immigrants driving up prices. I think you see this in some federal platforms. I think last election campaign, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada, a lot of their platform was talking about housing in a kind of in a way that at first I was like, oh, I'm glad that they're actually talking about it.
Yeah.
They understand it to be an issue, but their bogeyman was foreigners. And sometimes you see places that talk about this, right? It's either the wealthy foreigner who's kind of buying up all the properties, or even like this like idea of an influx of immigrants now competing with everyone else for already such a limited supply, And I guess what's the truth of this myth?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a few different ways to kind of approach this one. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that in terms of the actual percentage overall, right? Like even if this argument was true, which it isn't, but even if it was like statistically, if you're going to look at the statistics and the numbers, the amount of homes and properties that are being purchased by foreign investors, it's usually targeted at foreign investors initially, at least. It's pretty small. Like in cities like Vancouver, where they ended up putting a foreign buyer's tax of about 20%, I believe. I think that's still in place. The percentage was like really not that high. I can't remember exactly, but it might have been like 6 or 7%. And in a lot of cities, it's less than 5%, for sure. So I think what that kind of, to me, points to is that it's just a really easy way to really distract people from the core of what's actually happening, which is that what the problem is. It's not that it's foreign investors. I find this always really funny. It's foreign investors, but the foreign investors are still investors. They just happen to come from somewhere else, like Hong Kong. When I was growing up in Vancouver, there was always this argument that like all the Hong Kong investors are coming here to buy up everything in case the Chinese government ever tries something. They can all escape to Vancouver. It's just like a stupid argument that is not really based in reality.
Yeah, because I mean, if they're investors, they're just playing the game like it's supposed to be played, right?
Yeah, I mean that was just like it's just a weird racist myth,
Sure.
basically, and it's just a way of like blaming them. Whereas in reality, it's like they're just trying to. It's just interesting because they acknowledge that the investors are kind of causing problems. They're coming up and they're buying housing that local renters could be living in and whatever. But they kind of just stop at the foreigner part,
Right. Yeah.
right? But it's like you're acknowledging that speculative investments
Yeah,
are
that these
damaging.
mechanisms are sort of the issue, but then it's
Yeah.
just like, hey, that guy doesn't look like me.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so instead it becomes, foreign buyers are doing this. Meanwhile, they put in a foreign buyers tax. The amount of foreign buyers did drop in Vancouver, and the housing crisis has not improved at all.
Vancouver, as we know now, has very cheap housing.
Well, exactly. It's like why? So like, why is it okay for Canadian investors and speculators to do this sort of destructive, these destructive practices in the housing market? and we don't criticize them or say anything about it. But then as soon as somebody from Hong Kong or somewhere else does it, suddenly it's this big problem.
Sure, sure. I mean, that's the sort. I feel like that's a classic thing of like these kinds of nationalisms, right? Where it's like when people talk about like nationalism, whether it's on like this ethnic or civic basis, it's always like it's us versus them, and we want to be strong. All of us, we want to be strong. Mostly, it's just so the actual like corporations or powerful people at the top have left less competition, right? It's more so that they at the whatever this upper echelon of society have less competition from like other people from other kind of like upper class kind of societies kind of coming in and competing with them, right? It's just to purely reduce it so that they have control over whatever this population, in this case, whatever like the Vancouver landlords and corporate landlords having control over Vancouver or not control necessarily, but let's say like influence over Vancouver's like housing market
Yeah.
compared to having to compete now also with people from Hong Kong or
Yeah,
wherever it
exactly.
might be.
They just want more of the pie to
No,
themselves.
exactly, exactly.
And then on a government level, the idea that foreign investors are like not welcome in the housing market and in Canada in general is also just a silly idea because there's so many projects. I mean, there's a million projects that you can look at that, you know, whether it's housing or infrastructure or any of these things in Canada, we're constantly partnering with like whether it's like U.S. or like European companies, and I think of like the highway in Ontario where they sold it for like in the 90s. There was a major highway that they built around Toronto, and the government like built it for like $3 billion or something like that. I don't know. They ended up selling it to a foreign corporation from like Spain, who now like has a toll road on the highway and basically collects like $40 billion a year, where like we sold it to them for like $3 billion,
Incredible.
and there's like stuff like that, or there's like all sorts of things like the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, like all the stuff going on there, where we basically are just it's just like a slush fund, like we're just like handing out money and infrastructure to basically just foreign companies. Like it has nothing to do with foreign companies. There's so many instances of major infrastructure projects and major housing investment projects and development that are done with foreign companies. In this case, they can just go, well, it's basically just racism. They're just going, well, these investors are coming from Asia. It's always when I was growing up in BC, it was always about Asian investors. No one was talking about U.S. companies like BlackRock
Sure.
or whatever coming into Canada to buy up all of our road infrastructure or buy up all of our housing and gut it and evict everybody or something like that, right? So it's just a little bit of a
Racism.
it's just a bit of a racism.
Classic. It's like the Scooby Doo thing where like we take off the mask,
Yeah.
like housing crisis, and it's like, oh, racism. It's
Yeah.
like, it was you all along.
Yeah, exactly. So it really is just it's scapegoating ultimately.
Okay, okay. Myth number 3:
Oh.
we need to help first-time home buyers. So I guess when we were talking before about the kind of different facets of this housing crisis, one that you see a lot of policy around, specifically, I'd say like a lot of liberal policies, right? This kind of classic like means tested thing of instead of trying to do these big um, sweeping policies and changes, it's more of these like very precise, targeted benefits, right? So in this case, a lot of government programs focus on first-time home buyers. How do we make it easier for them to buy their house? Because that's sort of the issue. All these people who are sort of ready, willing. These like kind of like these families who are professional. They do so well for themselves, but they can't. They're locked out of the housing market. How do we help them get into that housing market? Yeah. Then I guess so the myth is that we need to help them. Is that
Yeah.
is that the case? Is that going to solve affordability?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I mean, really, obviously, the point here is that, I mean, in some way, I guess it's helpful because if people want to own a home and they can't, you can, I don't know, give them tax credits or a first-time home buyer subsidy or whatever to get people into the market. But that obviously doesn't actually address what's going on. It's almost a way of there's a systemic issue going on that you're almost artificially maintaining by bringing all these people into the housing market without addressing any of the systemic reasons for why housing has become so expensive. It's very similar to when I was talking about these people being brought into the housing market at very low interest rates and taking on these variable rate mortgages. Like that is basically an exact example of trying to help first time home buyers, right? They really pitched it as well. We can get more people into the market and help them build equity and whatever. And obviously, all they've done is they've just over leveraged all these people, brought them in, and they can't pay for stuff, which is not really fair. So it just doesn't address it doesn't reduce prices. It doesn't, and there's also the question of, obviously owning a home is something a lot of people want to do for a couple of reasons, and I'll get to that. But, there's also kind of how we talked about how the housing market is multifaceted. I mean, if home prices are just so out of control and people just cannot afford to buy these houses, do we really need to be purposely like pushing people into this housing market and doing everything we can to get them into a broken market, as opposed to, I don't know, building more affordable housing that they could just rent at an affordable rate? Because really, at the end of the day, it's like, you could pay a landlord or you could pay the bank, right? Do they need to be paying absurd rates to the bank when they could just have, if the government could just focus in on building alternatives to home buying? Not that I think buying a home is necessarily the worst idea, but
I guess what do you have in mind when you say alternative?
Just basically rentals and stuff, right? Like, does everybody need to necessarily be buying I mean, I think we do need to. If somebody wants to buy like a suburban home or whatever, they should be able to. We should have a market where they're able to. But I think the idea of artificially subsidizing the market is just sort of silly, and it also sets people up for a little bit of potential failure. So this was something I didn't really talk about at the beginning. I think that the whole topic of do homeowners benefit, it's such a big topic. There's just so much you can say about it. It's hard to get everything in there. But there's one thing that's really important when you consider getting first-time home buyers into the market, and that is this idea that buying a home is this really great investment, and that's why we need to help first-time home buyers, not just because people should be able to have a home, but also because buying a home is a good investment that builds your equity. This is kind of true, obviously, but I think it points to sort of a bigger problem, which is that by getting all these first-time home buyers into the market, a part of what they're actually trying to do is that, home ownership has basically become a way of privatizing retirement. And it used to be that people, would get a pension. People who work for the government often still get a pension, but obviously, I mean, who do you know who works anywhere where they're getting a pension, right? I don't think any of the three people in this room, I don't think we're getting any pensions for podcasting.
I'm waiting. I'm checking my emails. I'm checking my emails to see.
But it used to be like a really normal thing.
Sure.
And now, since sort of the proliferation of home ownership, it's become much easier to strip away those benefits and take pressure off of like employers and corporations and the government, and instead just help people get into the housing market. We're going to just give you a first-time home buyer benefit thing, and now you don't have to really worry about your retirement, and neither does the government. We don't have to worry about it because you're in charge of your own retirement, which to me seems a little antisocial. Like, should we not be taking care of retirees and helping our neighbors and people in our community to make sure they have a comfortable existence post-retirement?
What a concept,
right? But instead, that's not what we're doing. We're telling people, get into the market, and then you can go take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's a lot of interesting things you're saying here that I want to get to. I mean, first one, the real big bombshell, this kind of idea that this push towards home ownership is at once like, like, oh, it's just people, they're selling people on like equity, how to build like your your like net worth. But at the same time, that's kind of coming at with the I guess the how would you call it, the erosion of kind of pension and this kinds of like otherwise more much more stable government mandated or even like what like union backed kind of like a safety into retirement. You know, I think
Yeah.
that's a really interesting dynamic there that you've laid out because I mean the kind of like this kind of dual shift is kind of very clear, right? Where like this thing that people claim is like, oh, this is going to be retirement, and meanwhile we're talking about like all these people who are like on the verge of like delinquency of their like mortgages, all the
Well,
people who are
exactly.
like, you know, it's like it's as if like, you know, it's like, okay, you can get a pension, but like we're not going to handle it. Instead, you have to do this very complex Rubik's cube to get your pension, and if you fail, well, then you get no pension. You know.
Yeah, exactly. And like you say, it's all these people who are being put into these financial situations that are sort of untenable or very, very stressful and difficult. And why are we trying to push people into these financially unstable
Yeah,
situations
yeah,
like
because
this?
that starts now that gets into this myth, right, where we need to help first time home buyers. Where I think it's an interesting sort of picture you're starting to paint. Where like to me, it almost sounds like imagine like we have these shirts that we're wearing. Imagine like in any whatever average market they cost like $20, but let's just say it's, you know, we skip ahead like a couple like let's 30 years. Every shirt costs $10,000,
Yeah.
and people's wages haven't gone up. The government response that's akin to this one is like, let's help you buy those shirts. Let's
Yeah.
help you get those $10,000 shirts instead of
Yeah.
being like, can we like not have $10,000 shirts? You know, can we?
Exactly.
Is that really represent? Do we like? Are we? It's a thing that tries to kind of like I guess these policies, in a sense, try to hold the market as it is, right?
Mhm.
It tries to kind of like it doesn't try to change the market at all. It tries to be very kind of like it's only like subsidizes consumers so then they themselves can go into the market, you know,
Yeah.
instead of trying to like question whether or not sure it should cost $10,000 if this
Yeah.
like little plot of land in Vancouver in Montreal should be like 1.2 million.
Yeah, but then again, they keep bringing people into this market, and then when you say, well, we should just lower the price of the shirt, right? We should lower the price of housing. Well, now you've got this situation where you've privatized everyone's retirement, and
Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
you're,
Yeah,
you're
hey, buddy, this is my retirement.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's like
this shirt's my
literally, and
retirement.
then they're gonna say, well, we're gonna bring the house the price of your shirt down from
Yeah, yeah.
10,000
Not in my
to
closet.
2,000 or whatever, and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
go, well, that was like, and in some cases, honestly, the price of housing has gone up so much that you could still lower the price of housing, and for a lot of people, they would still be making, a return
of course.
on their investment in some way. But that's not how people are. But it's not quite that simple, right?
Course,
Like a lot of these people are they're just stuck in these really untenable situations, and it's not going to be as easy as, oh, well, like the price of housing went down, and so now I don't have to pay as much or whatever. It's like a lot of people are just stuck between a rock and a hard place,
right,
and they're not
right,
going to be
right.
able to get out of that. And
If you had to also use a T-shirt analogy, how'd you compare it to that?
I I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, it worked, but
I'm really stuck on that
yeah.
T-shirt thing.
So yeah, I think in general it's just that without doing some structural change.
Oh, I have an
you know,
idea.
Yeah.
You know hype beasts.
Okay. Yeah.
So like hype beasts, for those who are unaware, they're sort of like, you know, they buy like I don't know, like the classic brands are like Supreme,
Yep.
Palace. The other kind of like usually they're kind of linked to like skate culture, you know, streetwear.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of the world where you have these kinds of like pieces of clothes that like they would sell for like $40, but because they sort of sell them in like limited quantities, limited runs, the prices would be like exorbitant, right?
Yeah.
And there are some people who have like just having it's almost investments, right? Because they're like they'll get to the store early, they'll buy the shirts, and then they just have like maybe I don't know like 20 shirts, but they're all worth like, you know, like 200, $800 depending on which one, and it kind of
Yeah.
starts becoming this like balloon thing where it's like, oh no, this is just like its own like market now, you know, this is
Oh
just
yeah.
like kind of like it's one of those things where it's just become like a commodity, you know. I feel like
Yeah.
you see that sort of reflected in housing as well.
Yeah. It's just the financialization
Yeah,
of
yeah,
housing,
yeah,
where
yeah, yeah.
it's just no longer a thing that's meant to be lived in. It's a thing where you're supposed to invest in it, and
No,
the
exactly.
price is going to always go up, and the government's always going to back the price of housing. They'll never allow it to go down because they're putting all these people in the market, and
Yeah.
they're going to screw them over if the price goes
The
down.
first time hype beasts buyer subsidy. That's something the liberal government would kind
I,
of
I
like.
would vote for that. I would vote for that.
Please help me get this
Get
big
my
hoodie
first Supreme shirt, my Supreme undies.
with the liberal. Yeah. Get the liberal L on them. Yeah, I mean, with the thing with the Supreme and all those brands, is you can also just buy a regular shirt where
Yeah.
for housing. It's a little. It's much more ubiquitous, much more all encompassing of the entire like market, right?
Well, it's like if you're like, hey, I need to buy a shirt, and they're like, well, the price of a shirt's too much, but like I'll sell you this like tiny crop top, and it's like it just like goes up to here,
Your
and
nipples are
like
showing.
yeah, it just like covers your neck and your shoulders,
You're like,
and you're just like, this is like not good enough. And
I
then,
love being, I
then
love being a
also,
homeowner.
yeah, and then also you need to pay thousands of dollars a month, and you're
yeah,
like, why am I? This is so insufficient. You know what I mean? And you also have like 3 children, and like they all need to share
The shirt.
the shirt with you.
It's
know,
my turn with
like,
the crop top.
yeah, literally. It's like that would be my analogy.
Yeah. Buddy, this is my retirement.
Yeah.
When I pass away, you 3 kids have to inherit this one shirt.
Yeah. Don't all fight over it. right?
Yeah. And you know they will.
You know they will.
No, I think this is at least for me, a very helpful analogy. Thank you
It
for
can be very confusing stuff.
Thank you for
I felt like I was getting a little confusing in the first myth there. So
Yeah. So yeah, do we need to help first-time home buyers? What's the definitive answer?
I mean, I think we should, but I think actually we should just help. We should help them rather than trying to help first-time home buyers to get them into the market and then kind of just leave them there. I think what we should instead be doing is probably coming up with solutions to help these people that were backed into a bad financial situation and encouraged by low rates and government encouragement. Right?
Baited.
Yeah, we do need to help first-time home buyers. Sure, it is a good way to help people get equity, but also I think we need to really focus on helping these people that are getting screwed a little bit, making sure nobody's going to bed hungry because their mortgage payment went up by 5 times.
A victim of a bank is a friend of mine.
I agree. Those banks, not good. Not good.
How's your credit? I'm just kidding.
I can't talk about it.
Myth number 4.
What's that?
You know who might need more help than home buyers?
Tell
When
me.
we're talking about consumers and T-shirts. How about the idea that we need to incentivize developers? The people making the houses, the people making these properties, and I guess with the T-shirt analogy, the people making the T-shirts.
Yeah.
You've seen policies like this in Montreal, right here, with the 2020 plan, where the city tried to mandate that every new development had to have 20% social housing, 20% affordable, 20% something or other.
Yeah.
To stimulate
20% family housing.
Thank you. Yeah, 20% family housing. But you saw with that policy, it was kind of a failure, as it was reported that no developer had actually decided to do that, and instead all of them opted to pay the fine.
Yes.
So I guess there's this idea that we need to give developers stronger incentives to build things like affordable housing for low-income families or low-income individuals. Because when I was talking about the vacancy rates, right? I think overall vacancy rate in Montreal as of July 2025, according to this City TV news article, overall vacancy is at 1%, where in the sort of upper income luxury housing market where rents are above 2,000, vacancy rates were 5%. So
it's interesting.
You see this sort of building, I guess, or this availability at a higher end, but then a lack of availability for, I guess, low income affordable housing at the lower end.
Yeah.
And so I guess people are questioning. There's a lot of policymakers who are like, okay, we just need to kind of like have like a carrot on the carrot and stick approach with developers, where we need to be like, hey buddies, hey guys, can you guys make us some cheap housing for the population?
I mean, that's basically how it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess to ask you the question, the whole in the format of this episode is, what's up with that?
Yeah. So a couple things here. This sort of, there's questions about specific policies for sure. Like in this case, the policy was just a poorly made policy that everybody was able to easily get out of and not build the housing that was promised. There were some cases where people, by the way, did build housing with this law, and there was just such obvious loopholes. Like, for example, the 2020 rule would mean that you'd have like a lot of family housing and affordable housing for first-time buyers again, getting onto that thing. And what would happen is that people would they would come in and they would like buy it at an affordable rate. And then there was no law to ensure that there was any perpetual affordability. So you could just flip it. Like you could literally come in and be like, I'm buying this because it's affordable. And then you could, let's say you bought it for $300,000. You could then just sell it for like 1.2 million or whatever. I don't know if that's just like an exaggeration, I guess.
Sure,
but
sure,
like
sure, sure.
that was kind of what was happening in a lot of the cases where that did happen. And so, where they did actually build according to that plan. So it is, it's a bit of a policy by policy thing, but I think kind of what you're getting at is maybe just more of a general thing, which is this the solution to the housing crisis? We need to incentivize developers, otherwise we're not going to get anything built. I think that on some level, 100%, you do need to incentivize developers in terms of like, if you get 80 non-affordable units and you get 20 affordable units out of it, I guess that's better than just having 80 non-affordable units and that's it. Like
You get to squeeze in a bit of affordable housing, and then
Yeah.
whoever made that policy gets to claim that housing as part of their numbers.
Yeah, I mean, this is a policy called inclusionary zoning, and it's a very popular one, especially among more neoliberal approaches to urban planning.
Inclusionary zoning.
Yes, inclusionary zoning. It's when you zone something so that, like, let's say, hey, you can build 80 units on this piece of land, but we'll zone it, give you inclusionary zoning so that you can build an extra 15 private units if you also build 15 affordable units. So it's like basically a way of another carrot
Give them a
stick
little
thing.
treat.
Yeah, and then you hope that they'll give you kind of a morsel. I mean, I think ultimately there's two problems with this. Okay, the first problem is there are a lot of cases, such as the 2020 plan, or a lot of case studies all across Canada where this has happened many times, where developers just don't hold up their end of the bargain, whether it's a loophole or just because they can get away with it by essentially leveraging their, I don't know, whatever it is. Like they basically will just bully the local government or planning department to get away with not paying what they're supposed to pay. Like I always think of the Woodwards building in Vancouver, which is a great example, which was, to make a very long story very short, it was a redevelopment project on an abandoned building in the lower east side in Vancouver, and the downtown east side, sorry, which is obviously a historically poor neighborhood, low income. And these developers came in and it was touted as this great win-win, right, of the housing market where the city bought the land for the developer so they would lower their development costs. And in exchange, they also did inclusionary zoning. But what ended up happening in the end is that basically the developer just got free land given to them, didn't hold up their end of the bargain. They didn't pay for any of the social housing. The city had to pay to develop all the social housing on the site. The social housing was way less than it was originally supposed to be. And the units were so expensive, it just gentrified the neighborhood so bad and just kind of made problems just way worse. It was that was like the catalyst for gentrification in that neighborhood in like the mid to late 2000s. So that's just one case. But the idea really here is just that there's all sorts of cases of developers just abusing the laws really and getting away with it. And it's just oftentimes not worth it. And I know in that case, it ended up, they had social housing on that unit or in the building, but because of the gentrification, researchers found that basically it led to way more closures of nearby social housing and shelters, because of the gentrification, and so overall it led to a dramatic decrease in that type of housing. There's a lot of stuff like that to consider, right? That's the big thing. There's also just another very long argument to be had about, really what they'll say is we need to incentivize developers because it's a supply side approach. We just need to have more housing. If we have more and more and more and we incentivize them to just build more and more units, that this is just going to help with the housing market. And I mean, that's like, we could have done literally an entire episode just on that argument. It
Right.
is, it's a really ridiculous argument that's not honestly supported by basically any research. It's just mostly peddled by.
It seems to have captured a lot of people, right? This idea of supply side kind of issues.
Yeah, I honestly can't even really get into it because I'll just probably talk about it for 40 minutes.
We
Like,
don't have that kind of time.
yeah, we're like, kind of getting to the end here. But yeah, it's another one of those things where, well, we just need more supply. But really, do we need to incentivize developers? Maybe. But if the goal of incentivizing developers is to get a little bit more social housing or to get more supply, really, I think what the alternative should be is that we just focus in on those sectors of the housing market that need the most help. Just get directly involved. Like, just build social housing.
Right.
Don't like just wait for developers to build so many unaffordable places, but then like there's a little modicum of affordability.
So
like,
you're talking about like whatever kind of like jurisdictions, like the province, the feds, the municipal, just build it.
yeah. I mean, mostly provincial. They need to do it. The province needs to be giving funding to cities like Montreal, and the feds need to as well. They need to bolster their programs for building that type of housing. But you need to focus in, and just like we said, it's a multifaceted problem. You need to focus in on homelessness and build shelters and affordable housing for the homeless or people that are at risk of being homeless. You need to build non-market housing as much as you can. Just zero in and just build as much non-market housing as you can. And it's just that's going to be just completely safe from the market and from the fluctuations in the market. Why are we doing this thing where we're like, let's just get developers let's incentivize them, and then 50 years down the line we're going to have more. It's like, who cares? There's people that are homeless right now that need your help, right? There's people who are at risk of being evicted, and like they need your help now. Like they don't need 50 years from now, they're all going to be elderly and retired, and like you're going to have done nothing to help those people with their life, right?
There's no immediacy to these kinds of solutions.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
So
I think I feel like you start getting into it with inclusionary zoning, which brings us to our last myth. That's to help with the housing crisis, we need to rezone.
yeah.
Is rezoning enough to fix the crisis?
I mean, really similar to kind of the last thing of, incentivizing developers. There's some unique things there, but it also is just, that and the rezoning. It's really, a lot of that is just part of.
Can you explain rezoning real quick?
Yeah, rezoning. It's the idea that basically there's a story, it's the supply story of that we just need more housing. But one of the major things that's preventing more housing from being built is, I mean, in some cases they go, oh, it's NIMBYs, like I talked about at the beginning, these homeowners, but it's also the government red tape.
Sure.
It's all standing in the way. And if only we could get rid of the red tape, then developers could build and fix their housing crisis, which, is very wishful thinking for a couple of reasons I've already mentioned. But this is a very interesting idea because I read a lot of research recently on this exact question. Does rezoning, if we just upzoned everything, is that going to fix the housing crisis? They've done that in some places. Some places have seen, I guess, some success, but I think that, in my view, it's a little hard to attribute it solely to rezoning. It's usually a mix of, you obviously need to have this multifaceted approach. And so places that do that see success. Places that just rezone and upzone don't really see success. And there's kind of a couple of reasons for that, but there's one main reason. There's one main reason that for some reason people don't mention this. The people like the landlord associations and the developer associations and the banks who are all funding all this stuff and want to make money, they don't talk about this very, very, very simple fact, is that if you upzoned everything, right? So let's say we had it zoned, you could only build 5,000 units, and we upzone it, and now in the city you can now build 50,000 units, 10 times, which is basically what they did in like Brisbane and Australia did that. Not those exact numbers, but they upzoned in all these areas.
Allow for more density.
Exactly, to allow upzoning for more density. And what ended up happening is that developers didn't build to capacity. There was a maximum capacity they could build at, which is like, let's just say 50,000. And they didn't build up to that because there's a very simple reason. Why would developers build so much housing that the price of real estate all goes down,
Right.
reducing their control over the housing market and reducing the amount of profit that they can receive? Developers, kind of, but also just largely landlords, banks, all the people that are investing in
Sure.
it, right? I mean, developers do, specifically large ones, they do really benefit from the housing crisis, but there's actually a lot of should be clear, same with homeowners, they're not one homogeneous group. There's actually a lot of nonprofit developers that do not benefit from real estate being insanely expensive,
yeah.
right? So it's really those big corporate ones. And what in this case specifically, what ended up happening is that not only did they not build to capacity, because that would just not really make any sense. It doesn't make financial sense for them.
Right.
But in a lot of cases, they actually just use this as an opportunity to just buy huge amounts of developable land and just sit on it. It's a practice called land banking. It happens a lot. It still it happens here. And I know in Australia, there was a study that found that just the top 8 development corporations, the top 8 biggest in Australia, were land banking. I believe it was around 600,000 pieces of developable land. I'd have to double check it. It might be less, so don't take my word for that. But it might have been, maybe it was somewhere between 2 and 600,000. But either way,
No, the point is a lot.
it was a lot.
The top 8 companies were just.
I mean, Australia is not a big country with that much developable upzoned land.
I was going
right?
to correct you. I was like, it's actually a very big country.
I mean, it's a very big country, but in terms of
you can't build out in the desert.
yeah, it's the thing, right? So yeah, I don't know. The idea that we just need to rezone, it's a tool, it's helpful, but it's not going to be the silver bullet that a lot of people say it's going to be. And I think they say that because a lot of our discourse is really kind of in this chokehold by moneyed interests mostly, who have a lot to gain from the housing crisis overall.
Right. So there's sort of I guess a reason that all these myths that we've talked about are sort of continue to perpetuate is because they sort of help kind of fuel the machine that is the market.
Yeah,
and people
exactly.
To continue kind of feeding it with
Yeah.
the poor home buyers and the people falling for these really, really risky loans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I feel like the one takeaway is that there's not quite. I mean, you said it right. There's not one of these is going to be the big fix.
No, none of them is going to be the big fix. And again, it's like they try to treat supply like it's the big fix, but that's honestly, it's really that whole idea of just the market is going to fix it. We just need to build more supply. It's really almost a way for the government to shift blame and responsibility off of itself and just say, well, housing is this economic issue. We just need to build more supply. And then meanwhile, as I mentioned, there are people who are homeless. They're going to be homeless. There's people who are spending, 50, 60, 70% of their income on their rent or their mortgage, or they're paying their mortgage and it's not even doing anything. None of this helps any of those people, right? And that's not the market's job to fix that. It's your job as a politician to intervene and clearly see that there's an injustice happening and that there's inequality and there's serious problems people are facing in their daily lives that continue to get worse. And the longer you say, well, supply is the silver bullet, supply will fix everything, it's just going to snowball, right? Without any focused intervention.
What should people push their politicians and representatives for?
I mean, there's so many things, but it would be great if they just funded affordable housing and built more non-market housing and gave more funding to nonprofit developers and stronger rent controls, especially commercial rent controls. I think would be really, really help with gentrification. I think things like that. But it's. And I think especially, I mean, the problem is just that the government just doesn't want to fund stuff.
Right.
They basically want to enact austerity, and they really want to do these win-win private-public kind of half solutions that
Sure.
don't really provide the help that people need, right? Just force your politicians to acknowledge the fact that sometimes there's not always win-wins,
Right.
right? Not every policy needs to be a win-win where the private sector makes money and then the public sector doesn't have to spend tax dollars, and then like we get to have this like half-assed end product. Like just acknowledge that sometimes things cost money.
Right. Right. You'd rather something just fully public, a fully public venture.
Yeah, and we'll just do the job properly.
Right.
Right? Don't do this half-assed thing that's going to take 50 years because we got to wait for supply to go down. Like just acknowledge that housing is something that people really need and invest in it accordingly. Same with, healthcare and education and all these other things
Right. Right.
where
Right.
when they try to come up with solutions for healthcare, what do? They offer private options, right? Don't do that for housing. Push politicians to just acknowledge that we need to fund these things and that they're important in themselves, and that we don't need to justify these things with these like stupid mental gymnastics of like, well, how much is it going to cost? Like, it's costing people like out the ass. Like, what are you
Right.
talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah.
Like, there's people paying $10,000 mortgages, and you're complaining about how much it's going to cost to build affordable housing. It's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? Like, they're already paying for
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
you know?
All the kind of burdens of costs are already being slowly shifted towards just regular people.
Yeah. Whenever you hear these people say, like, well, how much is it going to cost? Like, who's going to pay for it? I'll tell you who's going to pay for it. Right now, it's you and the viewers and regular people. Like, you're already paying for it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
that's
You're
who's
paying for this housing crisis with your increased rent, with the kind of like the
exactly.
increased cost of living.
So if we're already paying for it, let's all agree to shift how that money's being spent and put it into something, progressive and helpful and something that's affordable and, stuff like that.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you
So-
very much, Gavin, for coming onto the show, talking
Yep.
about housing myths, sharing some of your knowledge on the real intricacies of some of these assumptions. I think it's been very helpful, and
Cool.
I hope it's been helpful for you, the viewer. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you around.
Thank you very much.